My name is Joanna Belek. I'm 36 years old. 4 months ago, I sat at my mother's Easter dinner table. 21 people, glazed ham, the good china, and listened to her tell the entire family that I had been let go from my job. She said it the way people say things they've been saving, carefully, with the particular timing of someone who had chosen the audience and the moment. What she didn't know, what not a single person at that table knew, was that 3 days earlier, I had signed a new contract. A better one. A 2-year engagement with a firm I'd been in quiet negotiations with for 6 weeks. And that morning, before anyone arrived, I had framed it and hung it in her kitchen. She walked past it 4 times before dinner. Before I tell you the moment she finally saw it, please like and subscribe. But only if this story is genuinely landing for you. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love knowing who's in this space with me. Let me take you back to where this began. Growing up in Providence, Rhode Island, I learned early that my mother, Renee Belek, had a very specific idea of how a life should look, and an equally specific opinion about how well mine was measuring up. My family. Mom, Renee, 61, retired administrative director, social coordinator of every room she entered. She loved her children the way some people love projects, with enthusiasm, intervention, and a complete inability to let the project speak for itself. Dad, Paul, semi-retired, the kind of man who had long since decided that the path of least resistance ran directly through whatever Renee wanted. Kind, passive, present in the way furniture is present. My brother Scott, 3 years older, an orthodontist in Providence with a wife named Becca and 2 children who were, by my mother's accounting, the most accomplished grandchildren in the northeastern United States. Me, the younger one, the creative one, the one who had gone into marketing and brand consulting instead of something with a clearer title, which my mother had been gently mourning since approximately 2011. The difference in how she treated Scott and me was not cruel on its face. It was more like a weather pattern, consistent, directional, impossible to argue with because it wasn't any single thing. It was everything, accumulated. When I was 24, I landed my first agency job in Boston. I called home excited, barely containing it. My mother said, "Oh, marketing. That's very competitive, Joanna. A lot of people wash out. Are you sure you have the right temperament for it?" Same week, Scott finished his first year of residency. She threw him a dinner party for 14. I told myself she was just being cautious, that her worry was its own language of love. When I was 28, I pitched and won a rebranding contract for a regional healthcare network. My first major independent client, a $67,000 engagement I'd built entirely on referral and cold outreach over 8 months. I was proud of it in the deep-down way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't done something entirely on their own. I told my mother over the phone. She said, "That's wonderful, honey. Although, have you thought about getting a salaried position? Freelancing seems so unstable. Scott says his friend's wife had a terrible time with the taxes." I told myself she didn't understand the industry, that she was from a different generation, that the worry was real even if the expression was wrong. When I was 32, I went through a difficult 6 months. A long-term client restructured and pulled their contract. I was between major projects for 4 months, burning through savings, freelancing at rates below what I'd built toward. I didn't tell my mother the details. I knew from experience what she would do with them. She found out through Scott, who had heard through Becca, who had heard through someone who knew someone. She called me the same evening. "Joanna, I heard things are difficult. I'm not trying to say I told you so." A pause that said exactly that. "But this is what I was worried about. Consulting is just, it's not stable. It's not something you can build a life on." I sat in my apartment, 3 months behind on my projected income, and listened to my mother do the thing she always did, convert my struggle into evidence for a verdict she'd already reached. I said, "I'm handling it, Mom. I just worry," she said. "Scott thinks you should look into corporate positions. A title, benefits, a salary, something people can understand." Something people can understand. I have thought about that phrase many times since. The 18 months before Easter were the best stretch of my professional life. I rebuilt systematically after that difficult year, rebuilt with better clients, better rates, and a clearer understanding of where my actual strengths were. I repositioned away from general marketing work and toward brand strategy for professional services firms, law firms, financial advisors, healthcare practices. It was more specific, better compensated, and more interesting than anything I'd done before. By the end of that stretch, I was billing at $185 an hour, maintaining 4 ongoing client relationships, and had been referred into conversations with Caldwell Partners, a regional consulting firm with offices in Boston and Hartford that was looking to bring brand strategy in-house under a senior consultant model. Caldwell was different from anything I'd pursued before. Not a client engagement, a 2-year contract, renewable, with a defined scope and a retainer that worked out to $214,000 annually. Benefits? An office when I needed it? A team. Negotiations took 6 weeks. Quiet ones. I told no one except my best friend Petra, who had watched the entire arc of my career and responded to the news with a string of voice memos I still haven't deleted. On the Wednesday before Easter, I signed. On the Thursday, I called a local print shop and had the contract signature page, just the signature page, names and figures and date, printed, matted, and framed. Simple white frame, clean matte, the kind of thing you'd put on a wall. On the Saturday, the day before Easter, I drove to my mother's house to help set up for the dinner. She was at the grocery store when I arrived. My father let me in, gave me a hug, asked about the drive. I went to the kitchen to put down the dish I'd brought, and I hung the frame on the wall beside the window, where my mother keeps the things she considers worth displaying: a ceramic clock, a photo of Scott's family at the Cape, a cross-stitch my grandmother made. My father came into the kitchen, saw it, read it, looked at me. I put my finger to my lips. He smiled. For the first time in a long time, he looked genuinely delighted. "I'll make coffee," he said. What I didn't know until the dinner itself was that my mother had been preparing her own announcement. I learned this later from my cousin Dara, who had arrived early and overheard my mother in conversation with my Aunt Fran in the living room. What Dara heard was this: that my mother had been telling select family members in the weeks leading up to Easter that I had lost a major client and was really struggling. That she was worried about me. That she'd been trying to get me to think practically for years, and she hoped the family could be gentle because she was sensitive about it. I don't know when the story became that I'd been fired, whether it grew in the telling or whether she said it that way from the beginning. Dara said that by the time everyone was seated and the ham was being passed, the version my mother had been circulating was that I had let go from a position, that I'd had a job and lost it. None of this was true. None of it had ever been true. My mother had, over several weeks, constructed a story about my professional failure and seeded it into the family network before gathering everyone in one room to complete the delivery. The dinner was warm, the way Easter dinners are. Scott's kids did an egg hunt in the backyard. My Aunt Fran made the green bean casserole she always made. There was sparkling cider and my dad's terrible playlist, and the low, pleasant hum of a family gathering that is, on its surface, about nothing more than food and proximity. We were midway through the main course when my mother set down her fork. "I just want to say," she said, in the voice she used for toasts and announcements, "that we should all be thinking about Joanna right now. I know she won't bring it up herself because she never does, but things have been hard." She looked at me with an expression arranged carefully into sympathy. "Losing a position is difficult, especially at this stage. We love you, and we're here." 21 people looked at me. I felt the specific sensation of a room's pity being aimed in your direction. That warm, uncomfortable, wrong feeling of being seen incorrectly by people who care about you. I looked at my mother for a moment. Then I looked at my father. He was looking at the kitchen doorway. "Actually," I said, and something in my voice must have registered, because the table went quieter than it had been. "I have something to share." I set down my own fork. I didn't stand up. This wasn't a speech. It was a correction. "I wasn't fired. I don't have a position to be let go from. I'm an independent consultant, which is what I've been for 10 years, and it's going extremely well." I paused. 3 days ago, I signed a 2-year contract with Caldwell Partners in Boston. Senior brand strategy consultant. Annual retainer of $214,000. The table was very quiet. I wasn't going to say the number, I said, but it felt relevant given the context. My cousin Marcus, who was sitting across from me, let out a low sound that was almost a laugh. Dara had her hand over her mouth. My mother's expression had passed through several phases and arrived at something I recognized. The look of someone who has had their own production interrupted. Joanna, I was just trying to… Mom. I kept my voice even. Can I ask you something? She stopped. Did you walk through the kitchen today? A pause. Of course I walked through the kitchen. I cooked for 6 hours. Did you see anything on the wall? My father made the smallest sound. My Aunt Fran turned toward the kitchen doorway. Several others followed her gaze. Paul, my mother said without taking her eyes off me. What is she talking about? I think, my father said mildly, you should go look. She pushed back her chair. The table sat in an unusually complete silence for about 45 seconds. We could hear my mother's footsteps on the kitchen tile. Then nothing. Then she came back to the doorway. She had the frame in her hands. She was looking at it with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something past surprised. Something that was working through several emotions quickly and landing, visibly, on something that might have been shame. You signed this on Wednesday, she said. Yes. And you hung it here this morning? Yes. Before anyone arrived. Before anyone arrived. She stood in the doorway with my framed contract in her hands and 20 people watching her, and she did not have language for what she was feeling. My mother, who always had language. My Aunt Fran broke the silence. Joanna, that is incredible. Caldwell Partners, that's a real firm, I've heard of them. Congratulations, Marcus said and started to clap slowly. A few others joined. My mother sat back down. She set the frame on the table beside her plate, carefully, as if it were fragile. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't, I said. But Mom, where did you hear I'd been fired? Because that's not something that happened. It's not something that could have happened. And I'd like to understand how that story got to this table. The silence had a different quality now. I was worried, she said. I knew things had been slow last year and I thought… You thought wrong. And you told people. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet and I watched her decide whether to use the tears as leverage or as honesty. It was a decision I'd watched her make many times. This time, she chose honesty. I did, she said quietly. I told people. I thought I was… I don't know. I thought I was preparing them. Or preparing myself. For what? She looked at the frame. For you to need something from us. I'm always waiting for you to need something and you never do, and I don't know what to do with that. The table had the quality of a room in which everyone has decided to be very busy with their food. I let her words sit for a moment. There was something real in them, underneath the pattern of years, something small and genuine and not sufficient as an explanation, but true enough to deserve acknowledgement. Mom, I said, I need you to be proud of me when things are good. I need you to let the good things be good. That's what I need. She reached across the corner of the table and put her hand on mine. Okay, she said. It was the smallest word. It landed like something that had been in transit for a long time. 4 months out, here's what I can tell you. I'm 2 months into the Caldwell contract, and it is exactly what I'd hoped. Challenging work with a team that takes brand strategy seriously, the kind of institutional context that sharpens you. My billing rate converted cleanly into the retainer structure, and I'm on track with the first-year deliverables. The work is good. I'm good at it. The frame is back on my wall at home now. My mother asked if she could keep it, and I said no, gently and without drama. Some things you keep for yourself. My mother and I have had 2 real conversations since Easter, the kind we should have been having for years. She told me in the second one that she'd been telling stories about my struggles for so long that at some point she'd started to believe them herself. That her worry had become a narrative, and the narrative had become something she'd started to need. I didn't have a clean response for that. I appreciated the honesty, and I've been sitting with it since. We're not fixed. A lifetime of a particular dynamic doesn't resolve over a ham dinner and a framed contract. But we're different. She calls now to ask how work is going, and she listens to the answer. And she doesn't reroute the conversation back to Scott's kids within 4 minutes. That's new. I'm choosing to count it. My dad texted me the morning after Easter. 7 words. That was the best Easter in years. I called him and we talked for an hour, the longest conversation we'd had in probably a decade. He told me he'd always known I was going to be fine. He said he'd been bad at saying so. You could have said it, I told him. I know, he said. I'm going to try to be better at that. Petra, who had been waiting for my debrief with the patience of someone owed a very large debt, picked me up the Monday after Easter, and we drove to the coast and walked for 2 hours, and I told her everything. She said at the end, "You know the frame was a little dramatic." I said, "I know." "I loved it," she said. If you've ever had someone tell a story about your life that had nothing to do with your actual life, if you've watched a family member construct a version of you that was easier for them to manage than the real thing, I want you to hear something. The story they're telling is about their own fear, not your failure. The worry that performs itself publicly, the announcement dressed as concern, the pity distributed before you've had any say. None of that is about you. It's about what they need to believe to feel like they're still necessary in your life. You don't have to dismantle it dramatically. You don't have to prepare a rebuttal for every dinner table. But you are allowed to hang your own evidence on their wall. You are allowed to walk into a room that has been shaped around a wrong version of you and simply be the right one. That's all I did. I brought the truth into the space before the story could take hold. I let it sit there on the wall, quiet and specific and dated, and I waited. The truth is a remarkably patient thing when you give it somewhere to stand. If this story reached something in you today, leave a comment. Tell me about a time someone's worry became a story they started to believe, and what it cost you, or what it gave you when it finally fell apart. Subscribe if this is your space. I'll keep showing up. Take care of yourselves. And if anyone's been telling the wrong story about your life, go find your frame.